If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet. I'm excited and I must tell you why. I'm wearing blue, Air Force blue, as far as I know. And I can tell you we're now in a different studio because we're at the house. My wife has the dreaded disease, but she's fine, no problem. But we'll be stuck around, and so I moved into the bedroom, which we sometimes use as a studio as well. That's why it looks a bit different. And I have somebody very special here with me. He's a pilot, and it was Air Vice Marshal Hugh Slatter said to me yesterday that the man is an outstanding aviator. Now, if you don't know who's Air Vice Marshal Hugh Slatter, research that name, or just wait a little bit because we're recording him as well. He started at the Rhodesian Air Force. I think he qualified in 1962. That's before I was born even. So a lot of respect. That's why you will hear me call him either sir or you will call him colonel. He then moved to the South African Air Force. Marvelous career. 26,000 hours in the air. 250 different types of aircraft. Both his sons were in the Air Force pilots, as was his father in the South African Air Force pilots. And at one stage he commanded the Air Force Museum, which is something I really love. And if you don't know where that Air Force Museum is, I think it's in Pretoria still, then please go, sir. Go there, go and look at it. It's worth it. And also I've introduced you, but I'm sure I've left a lot of things out. Let me say to you, thank you for being here. We are most grateful for your time. Can you tell me, where do you come from? How did you end up being a pilot? Why did you even want to be a pilot?
Well, my father was in the pilot from 1936 to 1952 in the Air Force. He was during the war. He was on 21 Squadron flying Baltimore's and Boston's in North Africa and Italy, and then back at Air Force Base Swatco. So we used to fly with him, do flips in the Venturas and Dax and Harvards with him. And of course, I wanted to fly from there on. I just wanted to fly.
And so you got the chance there, but I see from your bio, it took a little bit a different road. I mean, you had to start working at 16. Perhaps you can tell us about that.
Okay. Well, my father, when he left the SAF in 1952, I think there was a little bit of politics in those days. We went to Welkom, and halfway through matric, my father took me out and he says, "You're going to go and work." So that was possibly a problem, but I went, myself and Mike Shakovic were one of two apprentices, the only first two apprentices in the Welkom Village Management Board, 14th of July, 1953. And that's where I started as an apprentice electrician. I did my apprenticeship, I qualified, I did my engineering, government engineering ticket, and I'd applied to every Air Force in the world after that, including the Rhodesian Air Force. I was accepted for Canada for the 1st of January 1960 for the Canadian Air Force. And then the Rhodesian Air Force called me in August. And of course, I went up for selection and I got in there as a pilot in the Rhodesian Air Force. And it's closer to home and there's no snow. So that's how I ended up getting back into flying. But I was 23 years old. So I was just about on the limit for pilot course. And I tell you, that's the best Air Force, right? The Rhodesian Air Force. Yeah.
Well, I will agree with you with the Rhodesian Air Force being that good. We had Wing Commander Prop Preller here, Geldenhuys. I'm sure you know him as well.
He was 2 courses below us, yeah.
Yeah. And I asked him the same question, which I'm going to ask you. Is it more difficult to fly in Rhodesia than anywhere else?
No, not really. It depends on what the work was, but there was nothing, no difficulty as such. No. You know, I was a fairly dull old guy, so I had to work hard.
Perhaps you can tell us about that, the pilot training, because I know that's quite substantial.
Yes, it was 2 years of fairly hard work. And I was lucky. I had a couple of very, very good instructors. I initially had Pat Meadows Taylor, and then I changed to Pete Petterboyer, who got me through the piston provost section of our flying, which is 120 hours initially. I went to Vampires, and then Roy Morris was my instructor on Vampires just for a few trips, and he damaged his back at squash. And then Mark Smitsdorf took over our training from there. And we got our wings after about 220 hours on the Vampire. I think I was maybe a difficult student because I was really determined to get through, and I was very tense a lot of the time.
How does it feel? How does it feel when you take an aircraft up for the first time and you're alone? Are you nervous, or do you feel you can do it?
I think I was tense at that stage. Being older and really wanting to fly, I was quite tense at that stage. And look, it took a little while to get me going through the system. Then I was fine. Luckily, I had excellent instructors who understood the situation. Yeah, so then it was fine. Never had a problem. I never had a problem on Vampires either, or after the provost.
How are these instructors in personality? I know that in South Africa, in the South African Air Force, we had a very famous one called Mannetjies Roux. Was a Springbok rugby player. Not many people know he was an instructor pilot in the Air Force as well. I was surprised when I found out. I knew him as a rugby player.
Mannetjies was in the Air Force Gymnasium with me, in the South African Air Force Gymnasium, 1957. And he was selected for pilot, but he also injured himself in rugby. So they put him onto the next course in 1958. And then Mannetjies went through the Air Force for a while. And I think he's farming now down in the Free State somewhere.
Well, we'll send regards to him as the song goes, you know. Still on Mannetjies Roux. That's for people who don't know, in South Africa, that was quite a big hit. I think it was Ulrika Rauch saying it. This takes me back many years. But I'm fascinated by these instructors. Are they? Because I know you did some instructing yourself in later years. I understand you were instructing the colored pilots, if I may say so, the black pilots, or the Ciskei and Wendell and those Air Forces. Now, I don't believe there's any difference between a pilot, whether he's black or white. I don't care. If a man is competent, he's competent. We pass that. But what you experienced as an instructor pilot and when you became one yourself, is there a difference, or do you still go back to where you were trained and try to copy those fellows?
Initially, I did our normal standard instructing as usual. Then I realized that these guys have got a different way of learning. You know, we've been taught to learn from books from brand new babies. And these guys learn from stories, or they used to. And I tell you something, I also found out there's a different way of instructing, a lot of patience, but I've had a couple of guys that are exceptionally good pilots. And I found there's either guys that are exceptional or completely useless. You know, we get average, above average, high average, etc., and low average, below average, and cheerio. But the guys are either extremely good or they're not good for flying. Like similar to us, we get guys that in no ways they haven't done all the aptitude testing as we do. So there's less of our guys that end up dropping out of the system because they haven't got the mental ability. So these guys, we take them up to a certain stage, and then we have a look at them. And a lot of these guys that didn't make it, I recommended that they go as second lieutenants into the army because they work hard, and they may, with a bit of, say, 80 or 100 hours of flying. I said, the guys, you could be an excellent chief of the defense force because you've got army and a bit of flying experience. So one day you work hard at it and you could be the chief of the defense force with your other Air Force background. So I've got some very good friends actually that are flying airline and still in the military.
It's a sad thing to me that many people, of course, keep on saying to me that the standards were dropped because of political reasons. Now, I don't want to start a political discussion. That's not. But I have to ask you, sir, would you feel safe flying with a pilot who's off color and who has come through the system?
Yes. Because where they are should be well trained. I've got a few of my guys flying at South African Airways with my sons, and they are excellent guys.
Well, that answers the question, doesn't it? It's that simple.
Yeah. And we all thought in the beginning, whoa, but it took some hard work. It was interesting, and I've made friends all over Africa. And I've trained guys in about 10 African Air Forces and some airline guys as well. So I've had a very interesting life on the flying side of things, and I'm luckily still flying at my age of 85. So
yes, and you still take your wife with you when you fly.
Yeah, no, perfect, no problem at all. I've just had my flying medical again. I've got to go through all kinds of extra issues, but looks as fine, all fine now. So I'm busy renewing my license at the moment. I do my test next week.
Do you think you will ever lose the skills, sir, which you got taught so many years ago, like navigation, or you just get perhaps a bit slower in reaction time?
I don't think so, because I have been flying solidly from little aeroplanes. I've been flying Vampires jets up to fairly recently. Now. I've been flying light aircraft, instructing on light aircraft, training guys in navigation. I have been lucky to be where I am, and luckily it keeps me, and I do a lot of simulator training as well and flying. So myself, I hope haven't slowed down that much yet.
Yes, when I met my late wife, she was actually programming the flight simulators for the US Navy. And I thought at first she was working for Microsoft or one of these places, and then she said no. And those things are so realistic, and they are actually capable of flying a mission 200 times before they actually do it.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So that has changed quite a bit. It's not like in the old days where you sit. I've seen some photos of just pre-war days now, or perhaps during the war, where they sit in look like a little box, and then they are practicing gunnery or something, and this box tilts around and the pilot is sitting there. It's not like that anymore. You will train somebody with computers all the time.
Yeah, we've still got at the Air Force Museum, we've got about 3 of those old box type simulators. They worked on compressed air and etc., etc.
Now I have to ask you, sir, when you fly so many different aircraft, don't you get confused?
Sorry, I lost.
I have to ask you, when you fly so many different aircraft, don't you get confused with them?
Luckily, no. I've qualified test pilot, class 1 test pilot, production and experimental. And you know what? It's an airplane. The big thing is you get your manual in the morning at 8 o'clock, and they say 11 o'clock you're going to test fly an Impala or Iramaki 326, or they give you the notes today and tomorrow you're going to fly a Mirage. And you get used to it, actually. And because I've been flying so many different light aircraft, I can fly most of them. On the executive jets, of course, you've got to keep yourself up on, because they're different inside. But basically, it's the same. The flying part is reasonable take.
Is there a big difference between combat flying and just flying?
Yes, there is. Depends. Now, if you're flying passengers, you want them to be comfortable. You want to fly smoothly and gently, and hopefully you do a nice greaser landing at the other side. If you don't, then they think, "Oh, this is a terrible pilot." That is actually can be anything that causes that. Combat flying is you've got to work that airplane to its limits. That's where you do the difference between them. You're flying the jets. I fly 3 or 4 different executive jets, the Hawker 4000, the 800 XP, all the citation range, and the Beach jet, etc. So those type of things you fly gently. Otherwise, you're going to have passengers getting a bit upset.
You've had such a marvelous life, sir, but I was thinking while you were talking, but perhaps you should just tell us your life story. If you can just answer and tell us, since the day you graduate as a pilot in Rhodesia, what happened? Where did you meet your wife as well? I know she's still with you after all these years. It's fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Look, as I said, I started at 16 and I had to work. And I was halfway through matric, so I had to study. I had to get my matric, which I did a lot through tech, eventually, Technicon. After 7 years electrical, once I did my engineer's ticket, I applied to various air forces. I got into the SAF in 1957. But at those days, my grandfather was a United Party senator, and we were in the wrong side of politics those days. So I wasn't selected. Maybe I was too dumb for being selected at that stage. And then as I was coming towards the end of my engineer's ticket, I'd applied to the Rhodesian Air Force and the Canadian and the Australian and the Royal Air Force. I was accepted for the Canadian Air Force 1st of January. And in August before that, the Rhodesians called me up, and I was lucky enough to get into the Rhodesian Air Force, closer to home, know the people. They're our people. So, okay, I started my training there, and I was about 3 to 4 years older than the rest of the guys on my course. But I had a fantastic bunch of colleagues on that course. They were varying. They were about 3 years younger than me, varying right down to me. We pushed through the course. We lost our guys. They went off the course. And out of the 10 of us that started, 7 of us got our wings. So it was a good percentage. Then we were posted to different places. Some went on to we did a Vampire operational conversion. Then from Vamps, I was posted back to 4th Squadron on Piston Provost for reconnaissance and ground, and Trojans for ground attack. Now, this Trojan is not the Trojan big radial. It's an AL-60B. We called it that because of sanctions, so nobody knew what we were getting. I've had the Trojans in Provost for 4 years. I happened to do the first airstrike on Op Cauldron. Then a number of airstrikes after that on Griffin, etc. After 4 years on 4 Squadron, I was posted to choppers. I did 7 months on choppers, and then I was posted back to DAX as an instructor on Dakotas. And I was the instructor and a VIP commander on DAX for, apologies, I went to DAX before choppers. Then I went back to 4 Squadrons attack instructor, and then I went to choppers, then back to DAX again. So it was quite a circular one, and I ended up as a VIP pilot, instructor and pilot on DAX. From there, after now, I'm talking about now, if you look at that, it's 4 years in the squadrons, between 3 and 4, which I'm very lucky. I got a posting to Air Force headquarters, and I complained bitterly. I said, I'm not an office boy. I don't want to be an office boy. And they said, well, you don't go, you don't get promotion, which is, I said, fine. Now, I was posted to headquarters as training 1 for about 6 months. And luckily, some guys resigned from 3 Squad DAX on 3 Squadron, so I posted back to DAX again. And I did another 2 years on DAX. And then they said, right, now you can use your engineering, and you're going to headquarters as a staff officer, works in bricks, something like that, and airfield design and stuff. And I said, no, thank you very much. And that's when I resigned, went back to the South African Air Force. Went straight into 44 Squadron in the South African Air Force on DAX again, as a training captain instructor. I needed 18 months there, back on DAX. But while I was on DAX, I'd only there 3 months at that, back in the South, when I was posted back to Rhodesia with a DAX, South African DAX. Put my old uniforms back on, flew there for a while. Then other guys took over from me. I think it was 3 or 4 months. And I went back down south, and I was posted from DAX to the VIP Squadron, 21 Squadron, flying HS-125s and the Merlin 4A, the VIP version of the Metroliner. And I was instructing on those aircraft. I was there for 8 years on the VIP Squadron. From there, I was posted back to little airplanes again as officer commanding 41 Squadron. That was my first command post, flying Trojans and Provosts again. And we modified the Trojans to take the 37mm rockets as well. So we were back to reconnaissance and light ground attack. I did another 3 or 4 years there. Then I went from 41 to the Air Force Museum, because I'd been involved in building all the old aircraft up into flying condition with, of course, one of the best technical teams in the world. And these guys rebuilt these airplanes, and I test flew every one of them, from the Hornet, Moth, Chipmunk, Provost, Vampire, Edgar Percival, EP9, of which there are only 2 in the world. So I was very lucky, actually. And I was posted to the museum as officer commanding, and I commenced, started up the SAF historic flight. So which we never had then. The flying in the little airplane was just a sideline. I did 4 years at the museum, and we became one of the best known museums, flying museums in the world, actually, because we had 18 flying airplanes, from little old 1936 model aircraft up to the Vampires, etc. And then from the museum, I was posted to Officer Commanding 81 Flying School. Now, what 81 Flying School, to go backwards a bit, I started black pilot training for the guys from Transkei, Ciskei, Venda, Bophuthatswana. We were training black pilots. But it was done as an ad hoc job on my squadron, at 41 Squadron. We did our work in the mornings, and I was flying with these guys in the afternoons, instructing. So I started 81 flying school. We were at Lanseria, sort of in the odd buildings. And eventually we were posted to Swartkops. And we trained a bunch of guys there at Swartkop. And then the Air Force said, okay, now all these guys, having looked at how they cope when we trained them, they're going to be trained in Langebaan with all our other pilots. And my youngest son, Andrew, there were 11 of these guys on, no, I think there were 15 guys on his course. And there were a whole bunch of these chaps flying with Andrew on his course. They got their wings there. The odd one washed off, same as some of the white guys. But quite a few of them got their wings, and there's in fact some of them now up in the top generals in our Air Force. From 81 flying school, I was also flying a museum as an extra. Then I was posted to Air Force headquarters as, first of all, a senior staff officer, military cooperation and assistance. Die directeur militaire samenwerking en bystand, as they call it in Afrikaans. And I was there for about a year and a bit. Then I was posted as director of foreign relations for a couple of years, and that's where I retired from the Air Force as director of foreign relations. And I continued flying at Swartkops at the museum for another 10 or 15 years after that. So after that, when I was about to retire from the Air Force, Solenta Aviation contacted me and said, please, when you leave the Air Force, come straight across to us. So I went out of the Air Force. I had 1 week break, and I went to Solenta, where I was flying the Hawker 800 XPs, eventually the Hawker 4000s, Beech 1900s, King Airs, and I was instructing on all of those airplanes as well. So when I retired from that, we went down to the bush, Marlow Park, and then the Civil Aviation phoned me and said, look, will you join us? The Civil Aviation is a testing standards officer. So back to Pretoria again as a testing standards officer, where I did 3 or 4 years, 3 years and a bit there. And then, funny enough, again, back to Solenta for a while. Eventually, I think I've retired about 6 times. Well, supposed to have been retired. Fine, and it just happens now that I still do a lot of instructing. In fact, I was there last week doing some training and testing in the simulator. And so I do that as a part-time for the Solenta Aviation now, and sometimes for other people. Yeah, and that's where I am at this stage. I'm extremely lucky and very blessed to still be able to fly at 85 years old and fly lots of different airplanes.
Well, it's one of the most remarkable careers there is. And now I'm going to ask you, sir, what was Operation Griffin?
Right, after Op Cauldron, we moved to Kariba. Now, you must understand the operations they commenced due to terrorist bands entering Rhodesia, of which up near Cauldron, there were a couple of small ones before, but Op Cauldron was one of the first big bunch of guys that came into the northern side of Rhodesia, and we were operating out of Karoi, and then eventually Sete Centenary, etc. And then a bunch of gooks, if I can call them, came across near Kariba, across the river, and just between Chirundu and the Kariba Wall. And there's some big deep valleys there. And they got into this valley, the Chimwa Valley, as we call it. It was the Chimwa Valley. The army were following up on them. And as the army got into the mouth of the Chimwa Valley, they were pinned down. But the South African police, who came also up in Rhodesia, they actually came up to learn security, internal security ops. They were chasing the gooks into that valley, and our guys, the Rhodesian troop command platoon, if you call it that, were closing the valley off. So now these guys were trapped in the valley. But if any of our guys put their head up, in fact, one happened to one of the SAP guys at Chapter 2. I've got pictures of the whole team of them that were here. I've got when they were generals and colonels eventually. He decided to get up and look, and he got a bullet between his eyes. And he died at Chapter 2. And another guy got shot in the side, which went round his back, clipped his spine and out the other side. But the rest remained down. So we were called in because the choppers couldn't get in there properly, the way they operate. So myself and my number 2, Kenny Law, were called in with 2 provosts. And we went in with Frantan, which was our word for napalm those days, because it was a swear word saying napalm. We went in with 2 tanks of napalm in each aircraft. I said to Kenny, I'm going to drop slightly left of the valley. You drop on the right. We close the valley off so the guys can't get out. We asked our troops to withdraw about 200 meters, the ones at the gate, at least at the openings of the valley. And we dropped these things out, and we took out approximately, I think, around about 28, 29 or 30 something. And then the choppers went in at night, and the rest of the guys were taken out of that. I think a few days later at Kariba, we were operating from the Kariba base. They found one guy walking up the river. Well, he was so bad, he was in a state, he'd been burnt, and he was about to die anyway. So the guy shot him there. And then that was that whole lot eventually out, except for 9 guys. And they actually got themselves round to the other side of Kariba, which the army followed up and took that bunch out. So that whole bunch that came in were taken out.
There's a lot of people who don't understand. Now, I was in the South African police for 6 years. And my instructors at the bush warfare training at counterinsurgency, some of them were Rhodesians. And they were fantastic people. And they were experienced. And they would say to us practical things. They would say, lads, well, they were trying to speak Afrikaans, but sometimes they switched to English, and some of us actually understood what they were saying. Because where I come from, of course, you don't speak English in public unless you're forced to. So,
that'll teach you.
Yeah, but the Rhodesians were fantastic people. And they would say to us, lads, okay, what you do is show me what you have with you, and then we'll show them. And they say, off that. And then we off it. And I say, off it again. And by doing that, we started learning. We started learning all these tricks of the trades. And then we realized, even though we were training up to platoon and company level and even more, we were never operating like that. We never had more than 10 or 12 people in a police section out on patrol ever. And if I say section, I mean the entire damn patrol. And then your normal formation just doesn't work.
No.
So luckily I had one of my constables with me. He was actually a detective. I don't know what he did, but he was sent to the border with us. And he was in the Rhodesian, the South African police, but he was in Rhodesia. He was one of the older guys. And and he saw that, and he trained me, he retrained me. He said to me, okay, use those formations, use that formations. And that's what we started doing. And that is where my great respect for the Rhodesians come from. And the Air Force of Rhodesia was just fantastic. But I think so when you started, it was actually the Royal Rhodesian Air Force. This was before UDI.
Yeah.
Can you perhaps just tell us, how was it in Rhodesia? There's a lot of people who just doesn't know the history, and we have to accommodate them all. How did it happen that Rhodesia became a rebel under Ian Smith with UDI? Can you just basically tell us, and how did you feel as an officer, a young officer, and you had to make this choice, I suppose, of going to the RAF, or perhaps stay with Rhodesia. How did you make that choice?
I was given the opportunity to fly in the Rhodesian Air Force. And with what I worked for and the jobs we did and the way we did it was magnificent. Our guys were highly efficient. But the main big thing is they gave me the chance to fly. They trained me and trained me extremely well. And I must admit, we were known as one of the top 3 air forces in the world. And we were known as the best as far as ground attack, internal security operations is concerned. So in any case, it was tops. I spent 15 years there, and it was a wonderful Air Force. Then I left and went back to the SAF again, but there's it. Okay.
Is it a totally different culture, sir, between the SAAF, the South African Air Force, and the Rhodesian one when you came over? That was what, in 1977 about, wasn't it? The Rhodesian War was still going on.
Yeah, when I came back to the SAF.
Because what some people said to me is that one country, Rhodesians, were at a state of war. They were geared towards war, and South Africa was this big but powerful but peaceful place. They had no idea. They had no idea what was happening inside the bush, on the farms. They must have read something, but it wasn't the same attitude, sir, if I may say so. So did you find it difficult when you got to a more peacetime Air Force?
No, not at all. I was very lucky. Look, the SAF guys had been with us up there. Initially, secretly, they sort of came in as police, SAP, not as SAAF. And they flew with us in the same ops. Remember, the SAF is a huge, big Air Force. The Rhodesian Air Force is a tiny little Air Force. And they basically had to cover everything we did, from internal security to bigger stuff with Canberras and heavy stuff. So, and it adapted. You know, the Rhodesian Air Force adapted to the situation, just bang. And if that happened, we were there. If that happened, we were there. And now you remember the South African Air Force. Oh, and we operated basically like big mates with the army. We virtually knew every guy on the ground. If I went into an airstrike, I'd say, "Hi, Dumpy," or whoever was on the ground. "Hi, Paddy," or "This is Tony." None of this official and funny stuff. We say, "Dumpy, this is Tony." "Tony, Dumpy, yeah, okay. Brief me, where are you?" I'm there. I'm going to put down smoke over there, and we'll be behind the smoke. The rest is yours. Attack. And we go in on the attack. We do what we have to do. We virtually knew every section commander in the army, every second lieutenant upwards, and the generals got quite involved with us as well. So it was a completely different thing. You cannot sort of compare the SAF to the Rhodesian Air Force as such, because we're a huge, big Air Force in the SAF now. Well, it's cut down quite a lot. Anyway, so basically that's where the difference comes in. I had never had no problem fitting in. I wanted to fly. They gave me the opportunity to fly, and I did 15 years there. And the only reason I left, I was posted to headquarters, and I said, "Please, no ways." So I had another 2 years, but then they said to me, "No promotion if you don't go to headquarters." I said, "Fine." So I did another 2 years on DAX. And when they did post me, say, "Now headquarters, if you don't like it, that's it." And then that's when I resigned and came back to SAF, went straight on to DAX, and then spent my whole life till I retired flying airplanes. Even though I was director of foreign relations eventually, at Air Force headquarters, I was still flying at least every afternoon or every second or third afternoon, but at least twice a week I was flying, and I was doing some instruction on various airplanes.
I have many questions, sir. But before I get to them, because luckily I wrote them down so I will remember, I have to ask you if flying is as glory as it looks like in the movies. Because I've been told, especially the fighter pilots, the single cabin seat planes, I've been told by the aviators that sometimes you get like a, you know, a number one or something there, and you want to go to the toilet or just stretch your legs, but you can't because you tied down, you're strapped in. So is it as the movies, or is it more work, a job?
It's the job. I mean, look, they're not in the air that long. These guys, the fuel-wise, depends on the airplane type and where your strike is. But in the air, the fighters are there most probably an hour and a half to 2 hours maximum. So it's not really a problem for these guys. And I think if they go, they better go before they get airborne. But they outdo the job and they're back. Sometimes they have to wait at a holding point, initial point before they do their run-in, and they're doing it at a low level. These guys are sitting at 50 foot at something like 590 knots or 600 knots, which is pretty fast. So they run in, pull up, hit the strike, the target, and off they go back to base.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of people had a lot to say about that, but sir, this must be disconcerting. I mean, flying at 600 knots is close to what, 1,000 kilometers. It's extremely fast. And if you come in that low, I mean, it must have almost tunnel vision. And then it's exciting times. I don't care who says what to me. The blood has to be racing. And of course, people are shooting at you. I just want to say to anybody listening here, do not think ever that the Air Forces drop bombs on people who were not shooting back at them. That did not happen. So,
no.
Because it was tactical, so they were already engaging with the enemy, with the security forces by the time you arrived. All the security forces were there waiting for you to arrive. So it was like, you know, like a civilian strike like we've seen these days, and then let me rather not get into that. But is it not, it must be disconcerting, so to fly all this combat, all this adrenaline, the next moment you're sitting in the pub and you're having a beer. Does that not do something to you in your head?
Not really. I didn't do that much time on fighters. I went basically into transport. I did a little good to short time on choppers, very little time on choppers. And I've been mainly transport and VIP. And then, funnily enough, which doesn't happen that often in a big Air Force, I went back to ground attack again. So I did another 4 years on that. So it's not really that. I think the guys enjoy being back in the pub. They made it home. But you never ever shoot or strike something for no reason whatsoever. These guys were in the terrorist camps. They were sending terrorists into Southern Africa, into our countries, be it Rhodesia or South Africa. They were bombing pubs with civvies in them. They were bombing restaurants with women and kids in them. And that was it. It was basically a war against terrorism. And in the long term, they say we lost because we eventually pulled out of Angola. We never lost. It was a negotiated thing between Cuba and South Africa. It was negotiated. Nobody ever lost the war there, which was a good thing. But yeah, I did something. Sorry.
No, please continue, sir.
No, you go ahead.
I've heard the story, so I don't know if it's true. But it seems like the Rhodesian Air Force was so close to the South African one that they sent pilots over to fly the Mirage free. which at that stage was an advanced aircraft, quite quick as well. And then one Rhodesian pilot figured out there's something wrong with this thing's computer. To drop bombs or something. There was something wrong with it and he fixed it. That's a rumor I've heard. Is that true?
That was Rick Culpin. Yeah, he's dead now. Unfortunately, he died in an aircraft crash in the province. But the SAF guys, they actually modified the gun sights on the Mirages. It started with him saying, no, this is not working. And they modified the gun sights, made them a hell of a lot better than they were. I don't know the detail of it, but that's what happened.
So the rumor is true. So the French should actually pay him some kind of royalty for it, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah. I know that one of your pilots, I think it's a fellow you called your former instructor, Pete Bauer.
Pete Peterboyer.
Yes. I apologize for not being able to say his name. It's difficult. But I understand that he or somebody else invented some kind of a refueling pump which you could use in the field. And then all the Air Forces started copying this thing and they never paid a single cent towards this inventor.
Yeah, he did. And he did a few, designed a few bombs as well, different types for us to use in our ops. It was a refueling thing for the choppers, which the choppers had on board the aircraft itself. And it worked extremely well. Yeah. And the SAF choppers got them eventually as well, because we were operating together towards the end. I mean, it was one big outfit up top there.
Now, I've seen a few of these chopper pilots, and they were the funniest people you can imagine. So they would land, and of course, they were on radio contact, and then they want a certain color of smoke, and only that color. And they would circle quite high until they come down, and then they would land. And now, I don't know, they were normally bringing some aunties there from the Southern Cross or some generals, you know, the people who runs a war in a strange and mysterious way.
Yeah.
And then they would refuel, and they would want the drums of chopper fuel there. And then they look at this fuel like you cannot believe. They don't just tap it over into the aircraft, they really look at them. And I asked the guy, what are you looking for? And he says to me, water. And then he says, shut up, I'm busy. It's okay, he was obviously busy, but he's an officer, what can you do? So is this true? I was wondering now for the last 33 years, was that guy really looking for water inside the fuel?
Yes, you do. Look, all fuel has got moisture in it. And if your drums have been standing, or at the forward airfield, or an LZ in the middle of nowhere. But before you use it, it's got to stand up for a certain period of time, and the water condenses out. So the pumps end about that far from the bottom, an inch and a half, 2 inches. So you are not pumping water into your airplane. And then on top of that, you've got a chamois filter in the funnel. So to get the water out, yeah. Otherwise, you've got a problem.
So this thing of pre-flight is actually very important. It should not be taken lightly.
No, definitely not. And you drain water out of your airplane as well on the pre-flight. You've got a number of water drains on a collector box or from your wing tanks or wherever the tanks are, fuselage tanks, depending on which airplane you're in. So you drain your water in the morning, you've got a little glass goodie, and you could see the water in the thing. It actually makes like a little bubble at the bottom of the fuel. The fuel floats on top.
I know that the Rhodesian Air Force at one stage accompanied the South African one to bomb something in Angola. I can't remember the exact details, but must obviously been one of his long-range aircraft. Are you aware of that mission, sir?
Yeah. It was Canberra's, bunch of the South African and Rhodesian Canberras went in Bomluso in Angola, where there was a big build-up. And it was a highly successful op as well. We were working together quite well then, and it's well known nowadays that there are books out on it, and it's well known that we were working with together. I say we, I'm Safna. So whether it's Rhodesia or here, it's we. Because my 15 years in the Rhodesian Air Force was fantastic. And I was a very...
You had the best of two worlds, actually, sir. I mean, you can speak from both, and that makes you quite rare. But who would be in command of such a mission? How do you plan such a thing between two different air forces?
Now you've got a joint operations center, and you've got chopper pilots, you've got ground attack people, guys that have been experienced in every different thing. It's planned with the Army as well. So the Joint Operations Center, where it's got the Army, the Air Force, and where the police were involved, the police. So the Joint Operations Center would do the planning, sort the thing out, call the specific airplanes out that they required, with the specific weapons, because we could change weapons as necessary. Yeah.
I've heard that you were using a type of Fletcher type of bomb at one stage, like darts falling down from a very high height, I suppose.
A what kind of bomb? Sorry?
A fléchette, like darts, like it's not explosives, it's like a little knife coming down from there.
Yeah.
It's not against the rules of war, by the way. They used it in Vietnam as well, but they were shooting them with cannons. The Americans, that is. Do you know anything about it? Was it because of Rhodesia's isolation, or did somebody just got a clever idea?
We were in the bush, sometimes in a thick bush. We had the fragmentation bombs also we were dropping, which go off about 3 feet above the ground, or a meter, whatever they want to call it nowadays. About 3.5 feet above the ground, it went off, and it was thousands of little ball bearings. And there were different kinds of frag bombs. There were small ones, a 28-pounder, and then the big 1,000-pound, 500s and 1,000-pound big ones, which carried quite a lot of stuff. And in fact, they've got a cutaway one in the Air Force Museum here, under the Mirage, one of the big jobs.
That's not the Alpha bomb.
Yeah. Yeah, the Alpha bomb was a bouncing type bomb, if I remember right.
Yes, that's right. That's the one which of the area, and it's got different little things which comes out and explodes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
the Cubans got extremely upset and worried when they heard that the South Africans have the Alpha bomb close by. They thought it stands for atomic, for a twin.
Yeah.
Atomic bomb, which of course South Africa had atomic weapons, and they had the means to deliver them, and they came close. I think it might have been not as close as some people say, but they definitely were hinting that they might do it. But I don't think they would have, actually.
I don't think so. I think that would have started a major booming. But I don't think anybody wants to use nuclear anyway, be it the Americans or the Russians, because the first one that does it, oh boy, would be quite a thing.
Oh yeah, but, they will retaliate. I mean, they will not allow themselves to be nuked and they not do something about it. So that's the end of the world. So let's hope.
I think the Alpha bomb, the Alpha bomb was a bomb that bounced, a bomb that bounced around, blew up above the ground as well.
Now I've heard another story, sir, that during UDI, that is for independence of Rhodesia, that The Royal Rhodesian Air Force now became a Rhodesian Air Force.
Yeah.
But I've heard that right next to you in Zambia, there would be RAF, the Royal Air Force people also. And you two groups would actually meet and have a beer together. You were not enemies, despite what was being said in London.
Yeah, some guys went across to, in fact, some went back to the Royal Air Force. Some guys came back to the South African Air Force, and other guys went to the Zambian Air Force. And I think the Zambian Air Force, there were about, well, I know the one navigator that was our course commander when we were cadets, he went up there. And then a few pilots went up over there to them. But everybody knew what was going on. When then the British came out and they threatened to attack Rhodesia. And we were getting little notes from the British via the, it wasn't Air Rhodesia then, I think it was Central African Airways or something. And the airline pilots used to bring us little notes from the Javelin pilots in Zambia to say, don't worry, we're going to patrol, and some of our guys did parallel patrolling next to the other guys. And I think they said, if the war starts, you keep the beer cold, we'll bring the whiskey type of thing. That just is a saying, but there was no animosity between us. It was the odd RAF guy that was prepared to do it.
When you fly at Dakotas, now I've flown in the Air Force Dakotas. We had a name for them, Kotskoots. I don't know how to actually translate that, but it's wrong anyway. It's not fair. Yeah, vomit coach. It's not a fair saying at all. I mean, they weren't that bad. They would take off, of course, on landings with something else. They would just plunge from the air. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. But perhaps you've done it yourself, because you sit there and the next moment this thing just spirals down. And I always wondered, why were you doing that? And why could you not just tell the cattle there in the back, us, and you're really cramped in these aircraft, even the C-150s or the Tronsols. You sit like, your knees are like this, and you've got your R1 rifle between your knees, and your mate is here on the side, and he's ate some knoffel, what do you call it, the night before. But the worst thing about these Air Force people, sir, the worst thing about them is that flight sergeant, I don't know what he is, but he walks around there and he's got this stupid little torch. And then he sounds up here into the ceiling. And you see these cables and things. And they shake their heads. And then they talk on their radio and they look very concerned. And then they look at you and they show you're going to die. And then they walk away. What the hell could he get out of that? Because I myself thought to myself, if this aircraft goes down, I'm shooting that staff sergeant first. And then I'll be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they mean that. They pull the guy's legs, they make sure all your what do you call it? Your parachute hooks are hooked up on the parachute line, on the static line. And I think I don't know what they mean. I've never seen that happen myself. So
no, you would have been off guard. You are innocent here.
We're concentrating up.
It wasn't even a parachute jump. He was just walking up and down and shaking his head like something is wrong with the aircraft. I was like really wondering about it, because then you start listening to the engines and then they start sounding strange to you, which of course they were not. But I have to say, when a Dakota starts up, it's magic. Those engines are magic.
I've got 7,000 hours on DAX. And I tell you, I think I have had twice. I've had one on take off at Salisbury. I had a valve go through a piston, but the engine kept running, making a terrible shaking noise, but it kept running. I shut it down and we landed on one. There's no problem at all. And then I had another one on the way out of Thornhill, going down to the Lowveld. I started picking up a vibration, turned around, went back and landed at Thornhill, and they found a cylinder head cracked vertically down. It had a gap about that wide, it had cracked like that. And that is the only trouble I've ever had on the deck. And I mean, we flew those things hard, you know, and they flew low level. It's a blooming strong airplane, and I loved it. Yeah.
And they're still flying. I mean, there's a lot of VC-47s who are still around, the DC fleet.
Yeah, we've got some flying. I trained some guys at South African Airways on the historic Flight 1, and it's still there. There's still a couple that about, I say, flying here. Then most of them, the guys have taken, put turboprop engines in, which to me is sacrilege, but still, it's kept them going, and it's about 10 to 15 knots faster than the standard deck. They've extended it 48 inches. The SAF decks all got, except our museum one, they all got modified to the PT6 turboprop engine, and they were extended 48 inches to make up for it.
Those are the ones with the turbo, which we call the turbo decks or something.
That's right, yeah. The turboprop, they put the PT6 turboprop engine, so it's called the turbo deck, TP deck.
Yeah, I believe one of them flew into the mountains. It was dressed in a strange color. It was blue. I think it was on its way to Mr. Mandela or something, and it flew into the mountains, sadly. I believe everybody died.
It was going down to Umtata or Margate. And they started it, you know, look down, round, let's around the Drakensberg, you can get 50, 60, 70 knot winds, and they can change. I've had it in a 402, Cessna 402, where I ended up with nothing to a 60 knot headwind. And I think that's what happened to them. And they started their descent on time, and they just clipped the top of the mountain of the Drakensberg, sort of near the Ladysmith side. That was very sad, yeah.
When we started this program, so I asked you, there's such a thing as an old and a bold pilot or something like that. So you said to me, no, you're either old or you're bold. But have you had any narrow escapes which you can think to yourself, looking back, that perhaps you had a lucky break?
Yes, a couple of times. I have been shot in deck and provost. Luckily, they hit where it didn't worry us at all. I got one in a tank on the provost on one strike, and it clipped one of our pushrod tubes. It just took the edge of the pushrod tube. And there were a couple in the elevator. But the deck, I've had some in the trailing flaps at the trailing edge of the deck and the elevator. In fact, a few of us got those quite every now and again, because we were operating in Mozambique, north of Mukumbura and Kanyemba, that area. But otherwise, no. I've done some very funny things in Angola, but I never had that I knew of any hassles. And then during practice aerobatics with a certain instructor, it was practicing for a solo air show. And we did a high-speed run at about 160, 170 knots down the runway, pulled up into a loop, and we were a little bit, they went into a stall turn. From the stall turn, instead of pulling it over a bit earlier, I was actually sitting in as a standby. Pulling it over, it's around 65 knots. The thing started tail sliding, and by the time we got level, we were low, and we actually hit the ground and bounced back into the air again. So, but that was lucky. From there on, I've done aerobatic shows in Vampires here in the South and in Harvards. And everybody said, no, man, you're level too high. At 500 feet, you're too high. Come down. No chance. I said, 500 foot is my bottom limit, and I fly it to 500 feet. I don't pull it in on the store. So I learned a very good lesson there and frightened the hell out of me. Oh.
I'm glad you survived, sir, because I remember this is a bit before your time in SAF, but I'm sure you know about it. There was an opening of Parliament. I think it was 1971 or around, I don't know, I might be wrong. And the Air Force were having a display, and they flew into Table Mountain, I suppose, one of the mountains. And a lot of them died, including, I believe, a very senior officer.
Yeah. It was the 3 HS-125-400s, the Mercuriuses. Yeah, they were in and out of cloud, which were, I think I must now just, I was at Air Force headquarters in Rhodesia at the time in Ops when they called me, and Squadron Leader Thackeray, who became a general eventually, he was the SAF liaison officer, and he came and told me. They were in an orbit, holding pattern, and they had to speed up. Now, as your speed goes up, the radius of your turn increases. And they were about 10 seconds or 30 seconds behind, so they had to really speed up. And in the turn like that, they were just too wide, in and out of little bits of cloud when they hit the mountain. The number 3 guy actually saw it, and he pulled up, but he didn't make it. He hit above the other guys. Yeah, now that's a sad. 11 guys gone.
Yes, I'm keeping quiet for a few seconds in their memory. It's of course easy for us, we just read about it. It's a different thing if they actually knew the people, and I suppose it's from a pilot which you would never expect it, because all the pilots are good, otherwise they wouldn't be flying. But have you ever had sort of and I want to speak about squadron life, and I do understand some people say it's one big party, depending on the squadron, but I can see you're shaking your head, so it's not one big party, that's just a rumor.
Nah. It's a big party after an airstrike is done. And everything is done, you will have a party. Some guys do have parties. If you're in operational situations, of course, it's from World War II, from all the World Wars, I think guys eventually have a couple of whiskeys, or I've never drank alcohol, so I wouldn't know. But I do know a lot of guys have a fair amount of party afterwards, but not before. When the guys are going to fly, generally they're very, very professional. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
So they're safe in the air. I think that's what you people call it.
What?
They're safe in the air.
Yeah.
Now, there is something which concerns me a bit. In the old days, most of the civilian airline pilots were ex-military. And so you could know they were very well trained, probably had a good career. Now they resign or they retire, they take a second career, they bring all that experience with them. So the experience is everything in life, in my eyes. But now I understand that most of the airline pilots are not ex-military. They are now coming from the civilian schools. Am I right to be concerned, or am I just being over?
No, look, the civilian school, they trained at South Africa's got a lot. And there's a big flight school down in Port Alfred. And they name it actually after the Air Force base that was there, 43 Air School, during the war. And these guys are a lot of military pilots, instructors that are there, and at other flight schools around the country. So a lot of the guys have gone from the Air Force to these schools. And the guys are pushed harder. They really are pushed as they are trained. It's not quite as strict as the Air Force, because the Air Force, if you make a nonsense, you're out quick as a flash. Whereas here, they'll push you a few more hours. The Air Force, you've got so many hours to get there, so many hours to get there, so many there. And if you don't make it by there, they don't say, all right, we'll give you another 50 hours. They'll give you 2 hours more, and if you don't make it, goodbye. And that's the difference. The military courses are that long, 2-year course. And if you don't make it your solo by that time, you get 2 hours more. If you haven't done that by that time, you could maybe get an hour or so more, but otherwise it's gone. Flight school, I know one flight school when I was testing standards officer, civil aviation, they'd done 70 hours with this one young lady from Malawian lady, 70 hours, and she hadn't gone solo. And I heard about this and I went in and I said, you ground her now, immediately send her back home, no more flying. And I think, I can't remember whether they carried on up in Malawi or not, and I don't know what the result was, but that's the kind of thing. I mean, to go 70 hours, if you haven't gone solo on a light aircraft by then there's something drastically wrong. So it's that's like that.
Well, I'm glad that there are people like you who does not hesitate in making a decision, because sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah, no, look, of course it is, yeah. And we go and test, we go and examine instructors as a designated flight examiner. We go and sit in on a course or on a test that the instructor does, or we've got a number of testing designated flight examiners out all around the country. And when those guys are doing testing other instructors, we see that they're doing their examining part. And if that instructor is not doing right, the DE must say, cheerio. You've got to go back to the school and do some more training on that aspect of instructing or something. So there's at least two or three gates that cover that. And generally pretty good, the guys. They are pretty good.
I want to ask you, sir, about flight crew. We had another fellow here on from Surf, Jacques de Trois, as my wife would call him, because of the French way of saying his name, Jacques de Trois. And I asked Jacques, I said to him, Jacques, you aviators, you always wear these nice dark sunglasses. Is that part of your life, sir? Is that like a must, or is it really necessary? I know where it started with the US Navy, really, really necessary. But today's time, when you fly mostly on instruments,
I still wear mine. And when I do my flying medical, my eyes are still virtually perfect. It's not there to be a windgat. It's there to protect your eyes. And when I was on recce flying in the Zambezi Valley, I had my dark glasses and I pulled my sun visor down. So it's actually to protect your eyes. And the big thing is, you'll notice that they are the top of the range Ray-Bans or Randolph. In fact, I've got a pair of Randolphs here now, which are top of the range. You can't use cheapskate glasses. You go and buy some for R7.50 somewhere. You're going to mess your eyes up. So that's the reason. Not some guys like it. But
no, I was just asking because I've noticed And they get quite obnoxious. They're not as nice as you said when you take the mickey out of them a bit. They get violent. Some of them, or they try to. But it's actually important. I have to ask you, when you're flying as a cruiser, I understand the command pilot traditionally always will sit on the left seat. I suppose he can sit anywhere, but that's what I've heard. Now, how far is it possible for the co-pilot to override the command pilot? And should he do so?
Okay. Normally, that's the way it goes. The captain's the left-hand seat, the pilot's the right-hand seat. Except in big helicopters, funny enough, there the captain's the right-hand outside seat and the co-pilot. But it depends where you are. In some helicopters, the other way around. But generally, the co-pilots, once they've got experience, I know with me, when I had a guy when he had experience, I'd swap seats, left-hand seat. If you're an instructor, you train the guy in the left-hand seat initially. And it just depends on what you're doing, which airplane you're flying. I mean, on the bigger ones, I put the guys in the right-hand seat on the jets where you've got nose wheel steering, because that can be very exciting, and so can a deck, actually. But then you fly leg for leg. I would say fly as a captain from here to Bloemfontein, and then the co-pilot fly there and Bloemfontein to Cape Town. But you would fly from the right-hand seat. And you spoke about if the captain's making a nonsense, can the co-pilot take over? These old days, negative, because the co-pilot would get a shot if he interfered with the captain. The captain would say, you stay that side, shut up, and you pull the gear up and put it down, finished. Nowadays, it's completely with this cockpit resource management on multi-crew stuff. It works both ways. If that co-pilot calls you about saying we're getting too low, or we're low in the glide slope, or we off the localizer, whatever it is, and he's got to say something to that effect, he can take over from you. You take your hands off as a captain, and he flies it. And you'll generally, from that situation on an ILS, he'd go round. He should go round and start an ILS again, and then query what's going on. And then later, as the guy gets experience, he starts getting trained. He does a captain's course with us now in the company that we're within with Sorrento. They do a captain's course on the simulator, and then a check ride in the airplane, day and night. Yeah, so.
Well, it's actually a relief to me to hear that, because it means that there's two professionals who's checking each other, and it's not wrong to intervene if you really have to intervene. You should.
Yeah, you must, otherwise you're going to die as well. Yeah.
That's the thing. You can't eject from these passenger aircraft, so you're going to die as well. You have to go down. Well, I have to ask you, sir, if you will come back for next episode, because we haven't even covered half of what I wanted to cover, but we were speaking so elegantly on your side, and we've learned a lot. And I want to thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. I know you're a busy man. And if any of the viewers here have questions, we always invite you. Just put it below. If you are civil enough, we might answer you. And if you are not civil, we might ban you. Just a joke. If you have answers, if you have questions for the Colonel, then please put them here. The last question, sir, before we go. If there's a young man or young woman listening here, they want to be a pilot, would you say to them, go for it, or think about it?
I think if you want to do something, do it. Go for it and put everything you've got into it. You're going to get obstacles. I know I had them, and I'm lucky. I'm very, very blessed to be where I am now. As I said, I was taken out of school halfway through matric. I had to go and work. I eventually got myself on the SAF. I didn't get in as a pilot initially. I finished my engineering. Then I went to I applied to every Air Force in the world. I went to the Rhodesian Air Force, and there's the whole circle. And luckily, I'm still flying where I am at 85. So I say, you do not give up. If you want to do something, push yourself through, study hard, and work hard. Because you come in there in a sloppy attitude, you're going to get nowhere. So, yeah. And I mean, I have lots of youngsters come to my house out here in the bush. We're outside in a private game reserve. And I've got guys that drive 30K, 130 Ks from Pretoria to our place. And I've got no problem with the guys. I say, come to my house, come and sit here. Shirley makes a lunch for us, a light lunch or something. And I sit with the guys all day here. I don't charge them either, because I believe in the young people. And if I can help a guy to get the right way, that's what we're there for. And that's why I've still, where I am now, is so that I can help young people. I've been extremely blessed and extremely lucky to be them.
Internet, we've come to the end of this one. I'm sure there will be a next one. Thank you for all of you. Thank you, sir, once again. Give my regards to your wife and everyone else. And until we meet again, God bless.
Thank you, Chris, and the same to your wife as well for giving the internet. And thanks for the interview. It's interesting from my side because it makes me start thinking again of what, of the days. I might have made a couple of errors in timing and, like where a certain thing happened and when. But you might get guys come back and say, no, we did that on that day. But the guys that actually did this jobs. But in general, I think everything's where it should be.